Before we begin, we want to acknowledge that some stories and discussions in this episode of Radiant Resilience may touch on sensitive and potentially triggering topics. These may include themes of trauma and personal transformation, divorce and abandonment, family struggles and childhood challenges, and navigating identity and self-worth. Our goal is to share real-life experiences in a respectful and empathetic manner, offering insights into the complexities of the human spirit and the journey towards resilience. However, we understand that some content might be difficult for listeners. We encourage you to prioritize your well-being and discretion when deciding to listen. Please remember this podcast is not a substitute for professional advice or support. If you find yourself needing assistance, we urge you to seek help from qualified professionals or trusted support systems. Thank you for your courage and for joining us in a space of understanding and compassion. Welcome back, everyone, to Radiant Resilience. I'm so excited for this conversation today. It's a very unique conversation I think we're going to have. I have with me Alison Stieger. She is an acclaimed expert in mythology and personal transformation with over 2 decades of experience helping individuals reshape their lives using powerful mythological narratives. She holds a master's degree in mythological studies from Pacifica Graduate Institute and is passionate about guiding people to break free from limiting beliefs through the wisdom of ancient stories. Her work shows how mythology offers a timeless blueprint for growth and reinvention, using universal symbols to illuminate life's challenges and provide a path forward. In her upcoming book, Unstuck: Finding and Following Your Path Through the Heroic Journey, Allison shares tools for finding clarity and direction, empowering readers to unlock new paths to self-discovery and change. Welcome, Allison. I'm so excited for this conversation. How are you today?
Oh, thank you so much. I'm so delighted to be here, and I think this is going to be really fun. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on. It's definitely a unique topic that I haven't really heard of before. So I also am a huge book reader of like fantasy and stuff like that. And so I feel
Oh,
like
yeah.
some mythic stories and taking those and turning them into like helping us and learning things in our lives sounds so interesting to me. So I hope my other book readers out there are excited about this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yes, everything that's fun about reading fantasy is definitely there in mythology for sure. There's a lot of weird things going on, but it can be really compelling. So,
Yeah. So
yeah.
why don't you start out a little bit with telling us a little bit about you and your background and how you led into
Yeah.
some of this kind of work?
Yeah. So, mythology is so interesting because these are stories that have lasted and have stood the test of time, right? So, they are kind of honed around the human psyche in a way. Like, so stories that last for thousands of years, they've been bouncing in and out of human minds for a really long time, right? So what you end up with is this kind of purely psychological story, almost in a way. Like the things that about it that are lasting are the things that continue to resonate for people throughout time, right?
Mhm.
And I started out only looking back now is so often the case, living in a very mythic way in a kind of mythic family. And we always kind of look at our lives through the lens of our experiences. And having gone on to read a lot of myths as I got into my career, I realized just how mythic my childhood was. And what was unusual about it was my mom and dad met and married in Central California, which is where my dad was from. But he was a pilot and he was a great adventurer. He had grown up kind of watching they were sending a lot of planes out into the Pacific from Central California into World War II at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And, he watched all these planes going by overhead when he was, 4 or 5 years old. And he just was absolutely enraptured by this. So this became kind of a mythic moment for him. So when he got a little older, he became a pilot and he really wanted to live a life of adventure. So I don't know if you've ever seen the film Out of Africa, but he saw himself as kind of the Alaska version of Robert Redford. Right?
Okay, I
Like
haven't
this,
seen that movie.
okay. It's a little bit of an old one, but that was absolutely, I talk now about archetypes, and for him, that was the archetypal life that he was living. Like he was the handsome, charismatic adventurer guy, and so we moved to Alaska, And, Alaska is this incredibly powerful landscape in the sense that there's these giant mountain ranges. And so you're kind of almost like living in Middle Earth in a way, if you think about it that way. Like you're surrounded by these very dramatic landscapes. I mean, there's earthquakes all the time and volcanoes and these giant wild animals that you actually see on the regular. I mean, he would fly us around. We'd spend all this time out in the bush, and there were bears and moose and whales and eagles, and all these things would show up in our yard even, right? Like that's not a normal childhood, right?
Yeah.
So I had this, and he was absolutely an incredible storyteller, right? So he would tell these stories, and they were very mythic. They were about running, like coming face to face with a grizzly bear.
Were they
And
stories of his own, or were they stories he was
yeah.
making up? Okay.
No, they were real stories. I mean, he would crash all the time. Like, I don't know how he survived past the age of 40. Like, he would, these incredible things would happen. And so, I grew up with these stories being told. And he was not a great reader. Like, he would try to read us stories, but he doesn't have the same fluency, right? So he would tell these stories. And then my mother was a bookworm. So she taught me to read when I was really young. And I learned to love stories in the written form as well. And, and then they went through this terrible divorce when I was about 5. And, there was like kidnappings and hiding me and my brother in the bush, so the other parent can't find us, and all this crazy kind of large stories. And, eventually things settled, and we ended up with my dad having custody, and we grew up in Alaska in this environment. And it just, I don't know, there were all these kind of mythic threads that were sort of finding their way. It wasn't a regular childhood growing up, your dad out mowing the lawn on the weekend or whatever. It was not like that at all. So, so that kind of started, like, sort of set the stage for me in a way of, I often, when I work with myth with people, I talk about our creation myths. Like, what is the story of your childhood? What is your origin? How are those stories influencing who you are today? And actually, the next question is, are those stories, in fact, still serving you now? And by looking at them again, and, when you work with a myth as a personal myth, one of the greatest benefits of it is, if you tell your story, like, say you went through a terrible divorce or something, you might have a way that you tell this story to people of what happened to you. But sometimes if you can kind of recast it as a myth, what it does is it creates a certain amount of distance between you and your own story by mythologizing it. So you kind of put it, it's not like it's not somatically like inside your body anymore. You put it over here, it becomes this kind of more public, like slightly more public. So you put it outside the body. And what that does is it gives you a way to kind of walk around it metaphorically and say, okay, yeah, my mother always said that I was not the smartest person ever. And I carried that with me my whole life. And maybe A, that's not true. And B, this is not a story that's serving me. And I need to be able to say, no, that is over now. I'm going to put that part of my story down, right? So this is the great thing about it, is you can get a little bit of distance. You can start to work with it in a way that's new. And it really does give you a sense of power over your own story. So this is what I had to do too, right? So what I've been doing, I've been using these myths to create my own life and the life that I wanted. I had a really difficult time growing up. But what I've done now is, here I am in midlife, and I've got a great marriage, a really good family. Like, I made the life for myself that I really wanted. And these are the tools that I use to do it. So my favorite thing to do now is to say, let me show you how to do that too. We can create these incredible lives for ourselves. And we've got these tools, and they have been sitting here for thousands of years. Myths exist, but nobody really knows how to work with them in this way. So anyway, so that's been the whole purpose of my career, is to say, look at these old stories. They are for all of us. They are a gift from our ancestors, and we can use them as a way to figure out how to make our lives better, because we are not the first ones to go through this human life the way that we have to. So
maybe the first ones with the technology we have.
well, that is certainly true, but it's human life. I mean, it's the way that we react to things and the way that we struggle is often going to feel very familiar. And, when we look at a myth as if it is a metaphor, which is exactly what it is, you can strip away the things that are archaic about it. Maybe you're not going to the temple every day, or maybe you're not going on a ship and going on an adventure. Maybe you're not literally going into the underworld, but we go into the underworld a lot throughout our lives, right? So one of the main things that I talk about is, we die to old versions of ourselves, and we are reborn into new versions of ourselves all the time. And the myth that we talk about often, you said it already in the title of my book, is the heroic journey. We call it the heroic journey. But what we also call it is so common, this pattern, that we call it the monomyth.
Okay.
So we say, okay, this is what we're capturing in a story, right? Some kind of transformation, some kind of change in a human life. So, okay, you left behind your old life. You had to go on a journey where you went down into a deep part of yourself, and you had these adventures that went along with it. You have allies and villains and temptations, and you find a treasure, and you do all of these things, and then you come back out of it and you return to your community changed into a new person. And this is exactly what all of these myths are telling over and over and over and over in every culture. You have stories that say this hero left the life they had before, they went on all these adventures, they came back, and then they were ready to share whatever treasure it is that they pulled out of the situation, which is going to be wisdom or something to share. Maybe it's art, maybe it's a story about how you survived, it could be anything. And you're ready to go on and share what you learned with somebody else. So you have this beautiful continuity of the ancestors that came before saying, we went through a thing, we did this cool thing and it worked and we survived it and we were transformed by it. Or sometimes it's, we did this thing and, this was not the best idea.
Yeah.
It was a mistake. This is a cautionary tale. But we're going to share those stories with you. We're going to teach you what we learned about how to survive and thrive in a human life. And we're going to leave that for you in the form of a story. And we're going to make it really entertaining. And it's going to have romance and battles and jokes and all kinds of wonderful things to make it absolutely engaging so that you really want to hear it. And we're going to leave that for you because we love you and we want you to succeed. So you've got these beautiful gifts that have come to us from the people that came before. We can use them to figure out how to navigate our life successfully, which then prepares us to actually go on and do that exact thing ourselves so that the person that comes after us has that much, a little bit more wisdom or a little bit more guidance to go on their own journey, right? And I find that really beautiful, right? The idea that we can gain help and allies and everything that we need from the people that came on this planet before us. But what that's in fact doing is preparing us to do that for somebody else, right? So we are going to be the allies and the mentors for somebody else, just the same way that somebody else did that for us.
Yeah.
And what a great gift that is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a lot of why I've started this podcast too is, not even looking into the future, but in the now, like sharing our stories brings a lot of comfort to other people. And we have a lot of people on this earth that have that are struggling with stuff. And it's so nice to know when you're not the only one, because a lot of times it feels like that for sure. I love this concept because like I said, being a huge fantasy book reader, I'm always like, oh my God, I want to have that kind of an adventure. That sounds so fun. And to take your life stories and look at them in that same kind of way, because it doesn't feel like it in the moment when you're going through it. But I love putting that little twist on it in your mind to help you look at it differently and process it differently. That's really cool. I think this is so unique. I love it.
Well, and I will say this, is that there's a point that I want to make here. So I've called this journey the heroic journey. Now, that is not the traditional name for it that you might have heard before. Most people are familiar, if they're familiar at all, they're familiar with the phrase the hero's journey. And what that does is, first of all, it leads into a discussion of, well, what's the heroine's journey? And I've seen a lot of discussion and debate about this in my field. And I actually think it's a little bit beside the point in a way. So what I've done here, and this is actually new, even in the field of mythology, is to say, no, we're going on a heroic journey. So what that does is instead of making it an identity, it makes it a choice. So you are choosing to do this thing. And sometimes that's a really scary thing to do. And being a hero or being a heroine involves like having some courage, right? And it's so much easier to just not, right? There's a lot of people that go through terrible things and just barely survive them.
Yeah.
But what I'm describing is actually something different. Okay. And what it is all you're really doing is you're shifting your perception just a little bit. You're framing your story differently. And this is what this work is about, is to say, okay, you know what? We all have our stories. We all have the things that we've gone through in our lives. We all have pain. We all have trauma. We all have opportunities for growth. And what are you going to do with that? You can just kind of hunker down under your blankets and say, I'm going to wake up when my divorce is over, or when, the diagnosis of cancer, when, I don't want to deal with any of that. That is a very common way to react to any kind of trauma. Yeah. But what this does is it gives you agency over your story. I mean, you may not, your divorce may be like the worst thing ever, but what it's doing is it's allowing you to reframe how you hold the story in the space of your life, right? And what this does too, that's really interesting is, we're on these heroic journeys ourselves. But what we're also doing is we are holding the space of being part of other people's stories as well. So once you start to recognize that you may be your best friend's ally while she goes through her situation, or maybe you're somebody else's temptation of getting them away from the path that they need to be on, or maybe you're the villain, right? I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
understanding where you are in your position in other people's stories can actually be a really interesting thing, right? It shifts your perspective a little bit. So once you start to see your life in terms of going on these heroic journeys, it really can create a giant shift in perception and how you navigate those moments.
Hi, friend, and welcome to this episode of Radiant Resilience. We are always looking for new guests on the podcast. I want to highlight you if you have a story of resilience that inspires others. Everyone has a story, and I believe that sharing yours can help others feel less alone. Are you ready to share your journey and inspire others? I want to hear from you. Every story has the power to impact lives and foster a supportive community. If you have a tale of overcoming adversity, personal growth, or a unique perspective on life's challenges, I would love to have you as a guest on the podcast. To become a guest, please email us directly at radientresiliencepodcast@gmail.com or click the link in the show notes to become a guest. Join us in spreading hope, strength, and inspiration one story at a time. Be brave and share your story so others feel less alone. I hope to see you soon. Yeah, that's really cool. Let's back up a little bit and
Okay, sure.
tell me, okay, for those who are listening who maybe, I mean, we all pretty much know what a myth is, but maybe just do
Sure.
a little bit explaining of what you're talking about, and then also maybe share some myths that you use or like the most. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so when we talk about myths, I'm sort of using it synonymously with story, but it's really not. So and there's debate about this in my field. Like some people say that the only thing that's a true myth is a story that comes out of a culture that describes how the world came to be. Like, so this person would say like, oh, it's only creation myths or whatever. So what you do is you have a set of stories that come out of every culture around the world. Everybody has myths, every culture, and you're describing you're telling a story that allows the world to kind of make sense, right? Like this is how the world came to be. This is where we got this or that thing. This is why we live the way that we do. And then you have stories of gods, you have stories of monsters, you have stories of tricksters, and you have stories of heroes and heroines, right? So what approaching your life mythically looks like is you take some of the power of that giant story that exists in the context of a culture and you borrow some of that power for looking at your own life, right? And what that does is you can do that. I mean, it's like, okay, this is a big thing that exists in a culture, but what we've seen in the scholarship is to say, okay, I can see that this myth from Ireland and this myth from Aboriginal Australia are basically telling the exact same thing. So what we start to recognize is that there are psychological underpinnings to these stories that make sense because it's human beings that are doing them, right? Mm-hmm. So there is something that's common among all of these stories that says, okay, this is an essential part of human experience that we're trying to capture in the best way that we can in our stories. And when you start to do a little bit of comparative mythology, you can say, okay, I can see where the psychological patterns are happening. And I can start to apply those psychological patterns to the troubles of my own life. And it allows you to start to navigate that, right? So this is what we're doing here. We're saying, okay, I'm going to read the myths of China or Africa, or whatever, like whatever place it is that speaks to you, where their stories speak to you. And I'm going to take that and I'm going to find the similarities in the metaphor that is that story with the thing that's going on in my own life. Mm-hmm. And that's when you start to say, okay, let's look at this monomyth. Let's look at this hero's journey and this heroic journey. Now, we get that phrase from a guy named Joseph Campbell. He wrote a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces back in the 1940s. And he was capturing something that, he was a great scholar of comparative mythology, and he was seeing those patterns happening in a lot of the stories that he was reading, right? Okay, I see that the hero leaves their community. They go down into an underworld or an other world or a world of dreams or a world of gods or a world of the dead or whatever. I mean, it's some other place other than where you came from.
Yeah.
And they go on all these adventures. They meet allies, they meet temptations, they have a battle with some kind of monster or dragon or whatever. They gain a treasure out of that experience, and then they have to go back. So you can look these up on the internet for anybody that's interested. There's a million different versions of, well, these are all this, there's 17 steps, or there's 13 steps, or there's 3 steps, or whatever. And that's interesting to think about. But what I'm really interested in is, okay, you were in your regular life, you were comfortable and satisfied, and you were just managing just fine. And then something happened. Okay, maybe your partner said they wanted to have a trial separation and it kind of came out of nowhere. And so now what's happening to you is you have had a call to an adventure. Now, usually what happens in that moment is we refuse. Now, sometimes people just refuse because something that you're comfortable with, or at least is known, is changing. And almost everyone will say, wait a minute. Now that moment of refusal may happen in your mind for just a second, and then you're okay and you're ready to go on. Sometimes it lasts your entire life, right? Sometimes people refuse for decades. And, so we call it the refusal of the call.
Okay.
And when you think about it, think about Harry Potter for a second. Okay, so Hagrid comes to Harry and says, "You're a wizard, Harry." And Harry says, "I can't be a wizard. I'm not a wizard." That is his refusal of the call. And then the next second he's fine. He's like, "Take me to the school," it's fine.
Yeah.
But if you look throughout our fantasy stories, you will almost always see, okay, I'm refusing the call. And even when they don't intentionally call that out, it will be in there inside the mind, right? So, and I think that's just human nature, right?
Sure.
Something's changing for you. You're going to say, wait a minute, I don't want to do this. I'm not ready. You're going to have a second of hesitation. And then you go on and, there are certain things that happen. You're going to find allies. You're going to find people to teach you what you need to know. You're going to find the tools that you need. And you're going to be more and more prepared for we call this the apotheosis. This is that moment at the bottom of the, so if you think of it like a giant, like a clock, you would go counterclockwise and you would go down into the underworld, and you're going to have some kind of big confrontation with something. And when I teach, I lead retreats often. And one of my favorite things to do, I did this in Crete, which was really fun. I set up a labyrinth made out of candles.
Oh.
And what you do is I often use a lot of ritual because I think that moving the mist somatically into the body is actually really helpful. And we can talk about that more in a minute. But you walk through these candles into the labyrinth, and you have this confrontation with a minotaur that's on the inside. And I'm going to talk more about Ariadne and the minotaur and that myth in a second when I get to the what's my favorite myth part.
Yeah.
And what you do is you confront that, whatever that thing is. And what we're really doing is we're talking to a part of ourselves. Whatever is the thing that needs to be overcome, that needs to be left behind, you have that kind of grappling with this monster that is you. And you pull something out of that experience. So think of it as a dragon sitting on a hoard, right? You can defeat the dragon, and now the hoard is yours. But it's not really yours, because if you keep it for yourself, then you then become the dragon that is sitting on the hoard. So if you follow the heroic journey properly, what you're going to do is you're going to take that treasure, and your next job is to take it back to the community. It's not for you to hold on to. Okay. It is for you to share on with other people that need it, as I've been talking about, right? So you can, in fact, get trapped there and become the monster. So what you do next is you go back out, and you've been in the underworld for kind of a long time, and you have a second moment of refusal, because sometimes we get scared to change back to where we were, to go back to the place where we started. And we call that the refusal of the return. Okay. So when my book is called Unstuck, it's about, there's a lot of things going on in it, but what it's talking about is those moments of refusal, because sometimes, I see this a lot with people, like they are stuck in the hard place that they found themselves, because we can get used to anything, right? We can get so comfortable with our place of hardship that we're afraid to let it go and move on to the next stage of where we need to go. So when we talk about refusal of the return, what we're saying is, I need to not hoard this. I need to be prepared to share it on. I need to be prepared to go back to the place and take my new position as someone that can help other people. So when I look at this heroic journey, I say, okay, so that first kind of half of it is focused on yourself and getting your own needs met and moving towards your own evolution as a person, or your own individuation. But what you're doing in the second half of it is you're preparing to go back out into the community and share that work with other people. And sometimes it takes a minute to kind of figure out what it is that you need to share and how to do that properly. But it also really connects you back into this larger community, which I think, I mean, this is a lesson I would really like to get out into culture, is to say, we don't have to be so isolated from each other. We don't have to be so afraid of community. How can we find our place among other people? So that's a big part of what I'm trying to do with this work, is to say, let us figure out how to share those amazing things that we've learned so that other people can be helped, so we can be the ally and the mentor that other people need. So yeah.
I
Okay,
love
so
this. This
go
is just
ahead.
like resonating with me. So I'm like thinking of
Oh,
my own
fantastic.
life right now, and like, and then
Right?
honestly, just like my journey towards doing this podcast too, because
Mm-hmm.
well, I don't know how much you've listened to any of my previous episodes or whatever, but I
Yeah.
struggled for 8 years with infertility. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's kind of how this podcast got birthed, though. But, I went through all of that, and I knew at the end of it, at some point, I was going to do something to help
Yeah.
others, whether that was infertility specific or, in the
Mm.
end with this, I finally decided I just wanted to help everyone. So
Yeah. Yeah.
so I'm like, it's just so like, I don't know. I hope everyone listening to this is like going through this in their minds of their own journeys, whatever
Yeah.
stage you're at, because I think it's so cool to look at. And it's so true, because all those stories, I mean, even books that we're reading, and not just myths,
Mhm.
like they all kind of follow that same pattern.
Right.
So, or at
They
least the
absolutely
ones I
do.
read. So,
Well,
uh,
and it's so funny to me, because once you start to be aware of it, you can see it everywhere, right?
yeah.
My poor husband is completely trained. Like, we watch movies and he's like, there's a refusal to call, there's the apotheosis. He's an engineer. Like, he just has been around me so much. And he's like, okay, yeah, it's just like everywhere, right? Like the
Yeah.
other day, we were talking about the election. He's like, well, I really feel like Elon Musk is this kind of Prometheus character. And he's, and I'm like, what, where did you,
That's so
you
fun
definitely been
though.
hanging around me too much. Yeah. Yeah. It's really
Yeah.
fun.
It's such a cool
Yeah.
way of looking at things, in a different
Yeah.
way of than
Yeah.
just like being stuck in this, horrible, awful thing that you're going through.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, when you're in the midst of it, it's
Yeah.
really hard to look at it like, oh, I'm going to learn a lesson from this. I'm going to grow from this. I'm going to become a better person in the end, because it's, everybody
Mm-hmm.
says that stuff. On the other
Right.
side, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. But when you're in it, it's so
Yeah.
hard to feel that way. And I will say that a lot of books that I've read, when the main characters, there's so many times where I'm like, this is hopeless. I don't know how they're going to get out of this. Everything's
Yeah.
working against them. Actually, the books I'm reading right now are very much like that. So I'm like, oh my gosh, how are they? But at some point they're going to
Yeah.
come out of it.
Yeah.
So I just love this. This is so cool. So
And what I think it does that is so like magical to me, and the reason this is what gets me up in the morning, is so many of us feel bereft of purpose. We
mm,
don't really, especially kind of once you get past, you have a few, maybe a decade or two at the beginning of your life where you kind of know what to do. Well, I gotta like get my job, get my partner, get my child, get my house, get my whatever it
mhm.
is that you decided that you want in your life. Well, eventually all that stuff runs out, like and then you get to a certain point and you're like, what do I do now? How do
Yeah.
I find my way forward? But the answers are there. I mean, they are there in mythology, because we are not the first ones to go through this, right? So all we
Yeah.
have to do, I mean, this work is new, but it's also really not, right?
Right. Because
Like, it is
myths or
absolutely ancient.
mythology is
Yeah.
so
You
old.
know, we're
Yeah.
we were talking about the entire storytelling history of the world, right? So we've been dealing with this stuff, this lack of purpose. Once your kids are raised, or once you've done everything you want to do in your career or whatever, I mean, we have answers to this. It exists. It is there, and I see it as my job to help people. Like, say, it's right here. Let's just use it. Let's do it together. Let me show you what to do. And I consider it to be my job to show people how to do it, and then let them do it, right? Like, you don't
Yeah.
need me to kind of hold your hand the whole time. I will at the beginning, for as long as you need me to. But eventually you're going to find your own myths that resonate. You're going to find your own story. You're going to have
Yeah.
all the tools that you need in order to do it for yourself. So I want to answer the question about the favorite myth, but there's one little point that I want to make, because it's related to everything that we've just been talking about. So we talk in the West a lot about inspiration kind of coming down from the heavens. If you think about the way that you think about this light shining on a person's head, or, like inspiration kind of raining down on us from above, like is it the idea of the sacred's up here and it kind of rains down on us? Or, okay, I'm going to go paint a painting, or I'm going to write my symphony now because I've been inspired and it came down to me from above. But there's this wonderful word that comes out of Spain that I absolutely love. And I work with this a lot, right? In fact, I have a retreat in Spain coming up that's kind of themed around this.
Fun.
Have you ever heard the word duende before? Are you familiar with this word? Okay, so it comes to us from the Romani people of Spain and the flamenco culture. So what it means is you have suffered in your life, you have experienced trauma, you have bled, and you've shed your tears, and it's all of that is drained down into the earth. So the idea of duende is that instead of having inspiration rain down on you from above, what you're going to do is you're going to pull it up from the earth. And it's all of this pain that's drained down from you. And what you're going to do is you're going to pull it up, and you're going to take all of that pain and you're going to turn it into something beautiful. You're going to turn it into something useful. You are going to make art out of your pain. You are going to make something new that is beautiful, that didn't exist before, because you were able to transform and transmute this pain into something new. So if you go to a flamenco performance, this is what you're seeing, right? I got to do this a few years ago. My husband and I went to Spain, and we found this little poster on the street in Madrid. I said, come to a flamenco show. I'm like, oh my God, it's going to be so cheesy. It's going to be some tourist trappy thing. It's going to be ridiculous. But I knew the concept of duende. Actually, the poet Federico Garcia Lorca wrote about it back in the 1930s. He did a speech about it. It's this beautiful thing. And I was like, okay, if we go and I start crying, that means it's real duende that is showing up on this flamenco performance. And we go into this little bar, and it's the Spanish guitar, the singer, and the dancers. And within 30 seconds, I was just verklempt, tears. Like I could feel the power of what they were doing. So it's the sound of the guitar, the voice of the singer, and the dancers. And what they're doing is they're saying, we are the Romani people, the Romani people have been through a lot, right? They have been abused and tormented for almost their entire existence, run out of places. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take all of that. We're going to take everything about our life that has hurt us, but all we can do with it, we have nothing except our pain. So what can we do? We are going to make art with that. We are going to take it and we are going to make this dance. We're going to make this song, and it's going to sing the song of our pain. And it is the most beautiful thing you can imagine. And to me, this is the most sacred impulse that human beings have, that we can take whatever it is that we went through, and we're going to go on this journey, and we're going to transmute it and turn it into something new. This is the kind of alchemy that happens when you do this kind of myth work, right? This is the most horrible divorce. Like I've never been divorced myself, but my parents went through this terrible, terrible one when I was a child. And it caused a lot of trauma for me. But what I did by using this method that I created is to say, I'm going to take that pain and I'm going to turn it around, and I'm going to make something that is going to be beautiful. I'm going to make art. I'm going to make wisdom. I'm going to make something that I can share. And this is what this work is about. It's about how we do that. And that is a sacred duty of humans. Now, you don't have to, but every single person on this earth has a story that is a little bit different, right? I like to say this about, like, imagine you were a conjoined twin. You are stuck to your sister, and you have never been away from your sister for one moment in your entire life. Well, two conjoined twins are going to have a completely different view of the world. They will have made different observations. They will have noticed different things. They will have different thoughts, and they have a different thing to share than their sister. And that is true for everybody. You have gone through your life in a way that no human ever has before. You have made observations. You have had thoughts. There's something that's special and unique to you. And sometimes I teach creativity workshops, and I hear a lot from people that say they feel afraid to share what it is that they're creating. I'm not Shakespeare, or I'm not Picasso, or whatever. I'm not going to share my art. But if you do that, if you make that choice, you're not stepping into your heroic journey. Whatever it is that's unique about you will then be lost to the rest of us forever, right? Mm-hmm. And this is how I love to encourage people to say, like, you don't have to be a creative artist, you don't have to become a songwriter or whatever and be a professional at it. But the act of making art and the act of taking this and changing it into something else that then can be shared, however that is. I mean, it could be a recipe. It could be a story that you tell to someone in a coffee shop, or that you tell to your niece, or whatever. It doesn't have to be anything specific. There's no rules around this. It's just taking whatever it is, figuring all of this out by going through this journey, and then sharing it on somehow in some form with somebody else.
Yeah.
I consider that to be absolutely sacred. And I think it's the most beautiful thing, the most beautiful human impulse that I've ever heard of, right? We have so much darkness in our world, and this desire that we have to like share on. I learned a thing and I want to share how things can be better for you with somebody else.
Yeah.
I find that really beautiful. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's so great. So tell me your favorite myth.
okay.
Or multiple if you
I
have a couple.
well, I mean, there are so many powerful ones. It's interesting to see which myths you're drawn to, and there are so many great myths. But I really like the story of Ariadne, which comes to us from Crete, and her story is complex. She starts out, she's the daughter of King Minos, who was the dominant political power in the region at the time, and had defeated the Athenians. And her brother is the Minotaur. We've got the word Mino for King Minos, and we've got Tor for the bull. He's the bull-headed man that lives inside the labyrinth. And this is her brother. And we've got Theseus. Theseus is an Athenian hero. And because this battle has been lost, the Athenians have to send human sacrifices to the Minotaur, to Crete, every so often. So when you look at some of the Greek heroes, you can hear the word Zeus in there. So like Perseus, so it's like Perseus and Theseus.
Oh,
So you
right.
get the word Zeus in there because they're the child of Zeus, who's the king of the gods, right? So Theseus has his adventures. He's got a human mother, and he volunteers. He wants to be the king of Athens, so he volunteers to be one of these sacrifices. So he shows up in Crete, and they fall in love with each other, Ariadne and Theseus. And she helps him figure out how to navigate the labyrinth and kill the Minotaur. He could not do it without her. So you have this very strong masculine energy where you want to go in with a sword and just start hacking at things. But sometimes you need that feminine intuition, you need that feminine guidance you need both of those things in order to be successful. So what she does is she gives him a ball of red thread. And what he does is he trails it out so he can navigate the labyrinth to find his way out. And the deal they make is that he's going to take her away from Crete. She wants to escape from her father. He's going to take her away from Crete and marry her and make her the queen. So all of that happens. He kills the Minotaur. They escape from Crete. But what they do is they sail on to the island of Naxos and they make a camp there. And she falls asleep on the beach, and Theseus abandons her there and leaves and goes back to Athens to try to regain the kingship. Okay. So what's so interesting about this is it sounds really tragic, right? It sounds like a young woman that got left behind and abused and used by a man. But the next thing that happens to her is really interesting, because what happens is she meets the god Dionysus in Naxos. They fall in love and they get married, and she then becomes the only wife of a god of the Greek pantheon that is not cheated on. He is known as being the only god that remains loyal to Zeus. Could never, right?
Yeah.
Zeus could never. But in this case, she absolutely is loved and valued by Dionysus. She's still mortal, but when she dies, they put her up into the sky as a constellation. And so again, as I said before, myths are metaphors, right? So what we're doing is we're looking at the elements of this story metaphorically, so you can start to ask these questions like, was she really in love with Theseus, or was she trying to make this happen to get her out of Crete, right? Now we have to understand who Dionysus is, right? Dionysus is the god of ecstasy. Okay, he is the god, and you think of him as being kind of debauchery and drinking and all of this stuff. But he is holding the space of the ecstatic experience that can happen later in life, right? So you have this Theseus character. Now, I have met so many women throughout the course of my life and career, and I have never met one that did not have a Theseus type character in their past, right? You have your first husband, and what women do often is we're taught to be nice, we're taught to be supportive, we're taught to be helpful, and you pour all of this powerful feminine energy you have into supporting this guy. And you've got a lot of young women that are doing this. They're supporting their boyfriends, they're supporting their husbands, they're taking care of everything so that they can succeed. But then they get left behind, or they're not having their needs met in the relationship, right? So I had a Theseus character in my 20s, right? This person, and I would stay up nights and help this guy develop his career, help him, do his work in the evenings, and I got nothing back from this, right? Nothing. So, but what it did was it got me to the next place that I needed to be, right? So this is the point of this, right? Is you can say, okay, you may have been hurt, you may have been used by someone in your past, but how did it get you to the next place that you need to be?
Mm.
What is it that follows in order to, you need to find a way to get out of the place you were and into this new place. So what is waiting for you? What is waiting for you is the ecstatic experience. So if we leave all of that behind, we recognize that that time was maybe useful, and we figure out what it is that's coming for us later, right? So I mean, and this is just one of many myths that I work with, but I really love the way that Ariadne's story is a little bit more complex than it appears on the surface.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the way that it changes, because there's multiple versions of all of these myths, right?
Sure.
So what's the true story? Well, I mean, there is no one true story. They're all ways of kind of constellating a part of our psyches that we need to be able to see. So
I love that. Do you
there's
ever
my
do
answer. I'm
any-
gonna stick with it. What's
Yeah,
that?
I like it. So I think everybody's very familiar with Greek mythology. Do you ever do much with Norse mythology?
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. I
Yeah.
have.
Yeah. I mean, that's the only other like main one I know about. Obviously, like
Yeah,
you said, there's,
yeah,
myths in all different cultures and stuff like that, but
absolutely.
those are the two main ones I
Oh,
think
yeah.
people
And
think
I love
of.
Norse myths. Norse myths are often very vulgar. They're very funny. Some of my favorite, really, really, truly funny myths come out of the Norse culture. And I love Loki. Loki is such an interesting character as a trickster. I mean, he's a shapeshifter. He's very clever, and there's so much that we can learn from Freya and Frida. Some of these. Yeah, I mean, so yes, there's lots and lots of wonderful things about Norse myth. I love Celtic myth. There's a
Mm.
particular myth out of Mesopotamia that I work with a lot, the descent of Inanna. It's this goddess that goes down into the underworld to meet her sister, and she puts on all of these jewels and like accoutrement of culture that she has accumulated. And as she goes down into the underworld, she goes through 7 gates, and she has to give up all of these things that she's acquired for herself in order to go down. And then she's killed by her sister. She's hung on a meat hook in the underworld for 3 days. And then she had these little creatures that come down and they bring her back to life. And then she's able to reascend back into the upper world. And it's this incredibly powerful story about how we kind of let go of the things we thought were important to us in order to regain a new way of being in the world. So it's
Mm.
such a powerful, powerful myth. And one of the things I talk about is, myths are very big stories often. They are, capturing something about an entire culture, but they are so powerful because sometimes all you really need to do is look at one line or even one word of a myth in order to open up this whole new fountain of wisdom for yourself. Like in the myth of Inanna, the very first line is, Inanna turned her ear to the great below. And what is so interesting about that line is that in the cuneiform language in which this myth was written, the word ear and the symbol for ear and the symbol for wisdom are the same one.
Oh.
So when you actually turn your ear to the great below, you are actually turning toward a path of wisdom, right?
Mhm.
And just that by itself, that is one word,
Yeah.
one word in a myth, and it opens up this whole wonderful avenue of exploration and discovery and even wisdom, right? So and myths. I mean, this work is much bigger than me. Like, I would love it if more and more people started to work with this in this way, because I mean, there's thousands and thousands of myths, and they all have this potential for revelation in them. So
Yeah.
this is it. Like, if the myths that I like aren't working for you, I will help you find another one that is actually going to resonate, that you can actually start to unpack in this way and compare to your own life. So yeah.
That's really cool. Let's talk about breaking free from limiting beliefs through ancient wisdom.
Okay, sure. Okay, well, I think that we've been doing that this whole time, really, because
Yeah, that's true.
what we're talking about here is, we all are used to looking at our own stories in the same way. We don't even really think about our lives as stories. Like, we may go out to lunch with our mom and say, "Oh, you're not going to believe what happened to me at work this week," or whatever. And we tell stories all the time. I mean, this is actually incredibly true. There have been so many studies that support this. Stories is the way we communicate with each other most effectively. Like, I don't know
Yeah.
if you've ever given a PowerPoint presentation at work or whatever. If you present a bunch of data, everybody in the room is going to be asleep or glazed over or thinking
Yeah.
about something else, right? But if you're able to compellingly tell them a story, then you're going to pique the interest of everybody in the room. It is the only way to transmit information from one human brain to another. You have to tell a story to make it effective. And the better the story is, the more effective it's going to be. So, public speakers learn this, right? I was involved with the Public Speakers Association here for a long time, and people talk about this. Like, how can I tell a compelling story that's going to get people you get in the room and you want to share something, you have to tell a story. You have to be a good storyteller in order to really start to communicate well. So once we accept that and we understand that that is a true thing about human beings, then we start to look at our lives in terms of the stories that we are telling, even just to ourselves, right? So just doing that by itself to say, okay, I recognize that how I tell this story matters. Now I'm going to call back to something that happened in our earlier conversation, or the earlier part of our conversation, to say, okay, now I recognize that I'm going to walk into Thanksgiving dinner next week. And I don't know when this is going to air, but we're sitting here a few days before Thanksgiving. Yeah. So, think about any holiday that you might be, or just anytime you join with your family. Now your family has a story about who you are, right? And you're going to walk in the door and you're going to be hit in the face with it. And that might be a little bit uncomfortable for you. So what are you going to do about that, right? What you can do is you can say, okay, I recognize that my mother will always treat me like I'm 8 years old, no matter what. Okay, this is just an example, right? Yeah. So what I would do, okay, so if this is your situation, if you are being confronted with a version of your story that does not make sense to you anymore, I would invite you to look at it as if it was a myth, right? And you can do this. You can write whatever story it is that you want to work with out the way you regularly would, and then try to retell it as if it was a myth. Now you can do this in your own mind, you can write it, you can dance it out, you do whatever you want. You can find whatever method works for you. But if you do that, if you approach it and say, okay, my mother always treats me like I'm 8. She's not hearing me when I tell her not to do that. How can I approach this? What can I do to make this different? Well, there are a few things that you can do. You can say, what is it that my mother's getting out of this? Now, maybe what it is, and we haven't even talked about my archetype work yet, and this is a big part of
this. That's going to be the next question.
Yeah, okay, so let me just, we'll define what an archetype is, but imagine that your mother is seeing the child archetype when she looks at you. Now, there is something that you can learn from that. You can say, okay, and this is what I would always do, is approach it with as much compassion as possible. My mother, maybe she sees me as my 8-year-old self because that is the time of her life that she absolutely loved the most. She loved being a parent to a child of that age. That is the version of herself that makes the most sense to her, that she loved, and she's not ready to let that go. Well, now you're not so mad anymore. Now you're maybe having a little bit of understanding for where she's coming from, why she's doing it. She doesn't know why she's doing it, but you do now. You know something that she doesn't know, right? So then you can say, okay, I need to find a way to figure out how to make her feel comfortable with this new 35-year-old person that I am. And you can start to have a conversation with her to say, okay, tell me about that time of your life. Tell me about what made the most sense to you. Tell me about why you love that. And it also can help you understand the ways that you're seeing her as the mother archetype sometimes. Yeah. Maybe you're not fully seeing each other at all. And what it does is it just creates new avenues of conversation in our relationships. These are ways that we can find to get past our frustrations, to set aside the versions of the story that maybe aren't serving either one of us anymore, and find a new way to tell it. And once you do that, you've completely shifted your perception and you have a new way to be in relationship with each other.
I think it's really important, though, to remember that everybody's on a journey, right? And it's so true. So in that example, understanding why your mom thinks that way or why she's looking at you that way, I think is so huge, to recognize that she has her own journey as well that's affecting her and the way she treats other people and stuff like that. And I think that helps us have a lot more compassion in general for other people versus just taking that personally and getting mad at that person and being like, oh, mom, stop treating me like a child, but then when you can understand it a little bit more, but we don't understand it until we talk about it and communicate about it and tell the story, right? So I think that's
and I guarantee you, if you went at your mom and you're like, then your mom is immediately going to become defensive, and absolutely there will be a door slammed shut between both of you. It's not going to be effective. It will not work. It won't. But if you go to her and you approach it with compassion and you approach it with an open heart and you say, please tell me more about this, help me understand, then you're going to start to see things about your mom that you never saw before. But this is a really great segue into the archetype conversation, which is, if it's all right with you, I would like to kind of give some contextualization around what it is that we're talking about here. Yeah. So just to define archetypes very quickly, an archetype is a way of being human, essentially. It's like the perfect pattern of what it means to be human in a specific kind of way. So if you think about almost any noun that's associated with a human behavior, you're going to find some archetypal energy. So we've talked about the mother archetype and the child archetype. These are parts of the collective unconscious. And what they are doing is there is an enormous amount of energy accrued around the idea of what a mother is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there can be a light aspect, there can be a dark aspect. All of those things are inside of it, but it's a huge amount of energy and it builds up around people. So what I'd like to tell people about the archetype thing is you are, in fact, holding archetypes for other people without knowing that you are. So if in this conversation, in this description of the story that we just sang, you are holding the child archetype for your mother. Mm-hmm. Your mother is holding the mother archetype for you. So sometimes you're going to see the flawed and, changeable person that's on the inside of this, but a lot of times you're just going to see this big archetypal energy that's on top of the person. Okay. Mm-hmm. And I would say that if you meet, and this happens with strangers all the time, like if you meet someone and they're reacting to you in a way that you don't understand, it is because they are reacting to an archetype. You are triggering some kind of archetype for them. So if you go on the internet and you're getting trolled by someone, you're probably triggering an archetype for somebody. Yeah. If you've ever been on a date with someone and they were like, oh my gosh, you remind me of my ex-wife, they don't see you anymore. They only see whatever archetypal space their ex-wife held for them. And you might want to really safely consider what it is that you're doing there, because if you're willing to hold that archetype, that's fine. But sometimes we need to push back against that, right? Yeah. So once we understand that we are flawed and individual human beings that are carrying around a lot of archetypal space for each other, it becomes a lot more obvious why people react the way that they do, and it doesn't make sense. Yeah. Like it helped me. Like I'm a parent of 2 teenagers. I have 2 teenage boys. And when I figured this out, I could see that sometimes they could see me, the person that was on the inside of it, but sometimes not only did they see the mother archetype, but they needed the mother archetype. Mm-hmm. Now, my 17-year-old son's going to college in a few months. He needs to separate who he is from who I am. And he's been doing this for a while. And sometimes he needs that big, heavy archetypal energy to push again so he can separate himself from who I am. He was a part of my body at one point, right? Yeah. And this whole process of him growing up is him pushing that away from himself so he can be a fully individuated adult human being. And I need to help him with that in whatever way that I can. So sometimes I have to let him interact with the mother archetype. And sometimes it's really hard because that's, like, you don't even see me right now. Well, maybe you don't, but maybe that's what you need. And as a mother, I need to show up for you in that way. Yeah. And we are doing this with each other all the time, right? So if we can understand, especially, anytime you're around your family members, your mother is going to see the child archetype. So if she's reacting to you like that, she is getting a need met by that child archetype. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if you can understand what that is and how to shift your dialogue with her a little bit and help her recognize that that's what she's doing, it will make it easier for her to see the person, the flawed and individual person that you are inside of that. And it will actually show you when you need to show up as the child archetype for her, even if you're 60 or whatever. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's interesting. So we've talked a little bit about specific archetypes. You said mother, child, ex-wife. What are some other ones for somebody who's listening, who's like, well, I don't know, is that an archetype for me? Or, are there... Well, okay. So rather than actually, I'll tell you a few, and I'll tell you some more of this, but if you're interested in this work, there, you know about like tarot decks and things that you can buy. Well, there are archetype decks that exist, and you can buy them. You can buy them off of Amazon or whatever, and it will go through a list of maybe hundreds of different, like, okay, so this, you are an advocate in this moment, or you are a king in this moment, or you are a goddess in this moment, or you are a hermit in this moment. Like, what is it? So what you can actually do, and I do this with my coaching clients all the time, is what you can do is you can figure out kind of this constellation of different archetypes that you might be holding at any given time. Oh, yeah. And what this is doing, it's very similar to what a tarot reader or an astrologer does, is to say, okay, all this energy is moving around. How can we kind of get a little glimpse into what's going on? You can see what has happened in the past, what archetypes you might be holding in the present, and what archetypes are coming at you in the future. And it kind of gives you a little glimpse forward into what might be coming at you into your life. So I will sometimes do these kind of readings with people, but it's actually not that hard to do it yourself. And there are other, you can buy a deck, just let your intuition guide you when you pull the cards, and it will show you things, and you can recognize, well, okay, I'm experiencing the light aspect or the dark aspect of this at any given time. and it will give you a little bit of guidance into what the collective unconscious is telling you about what might be happening in your life at any given time.
So maybe it
So
triggers some type of feelings or whatever in you.
yeah,
And like,
yeah,
ooh, this makes me feel good. This makes me feel
right,
bad. And then you can kind of
right,
dive a little bit deeper into why
yeah.
and
Okay,
where
so
it
like
comes from.
say you pull the hermit. Okay, well, what is that hermit card telling you? It's saying, are you needing some time on your own? Are you needing some time to like reflect on your own life and kind of do a little bit of private work with your own self? Maybe that's what it's telling you, or maybe it's telling you that you've had too much of that now and it's time to move on to the next thing. You see what the next card is that comes up. It might be, goddess. Well, I got to like move into my kind of goddess energy now. So it just, it really is helpful to like pull some cards and maybe do a little journaling and write about it, or process through what you're thinking about and what your intuition is telling you in whatever way makes the most sense to you. I try to not confine people to writing or whatever. Like sometimes just physical movement is what you need to pull the energy through your body. In my workshops, we do a lot of like, I'll tell the myth, and then I have this program that I've developed where you actually map the yoga poses to the myth. So you actually tell the myth and you hear it, and then you go into the studio and you pull the myth through your body, through the poses, and you experience the myth in a whole different way. And it really is very effective because it allows you to figure out you need that energy to move through your body. And once you've done that successfully, like the Spain retreat that I was talking about, that we're going to be doing flamenco as part of that experience. So we're going to talk about all these myths and stories, but then we're also going to do the dance and like physically move our body in that way so that we can really understand what's happening. So
that's amazing. I love this. This is so fun. So tell me what it's like I mean, we've kind of touched on a little bit of what it's like to work with you. You do retreats. It sounds like you do one-on-one stuff. And do
I
you
do.
also do other group things as well?
Yeah, so I've got some retreats scheduled. I have coaching available. It's a 10-session coaching kind of package that you can do with me if you want. But if you just want to ask me some questions, you can always schedule a call with me for free. Just do a discovery call for 15 minutes. And there's a lot of material that I've put out on social media. So if you're interested in this work, follow my Substack, follow my social media, and I'll be dropping a lot of stuff. So there's every possible range of financial commitment to it, right? Like, and then again, the book is coming. It's going to be out shortly. So, if you're interested in doing this, please reach out. I love to talk to people about this. It's my favorite thing to do to help people figure this out because I've learned some cool stuff and I want to share my treasure. So, we're doing each other a favor by kind of showing up for each other in that way. So to be able to do that is the greatest gift for me. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways to engage, and I would encourage anybody that's listening, if you're interested, to come and find me. Easy to find on social media. Alison Stieger. Mythic Stories is the name of my website, mythicstories.com.
And we'll link all of that in the show notes
Okay,
too.
of course.
So,
Yeah. Please just reach out, talk to me. I would be delighted. Whatever way makes the most sense to you, I'm here. Yeah.
And do you work with people? I mean, we've talked about some certain situations, but have you worked with people with a whole range of different life struggles, or is
Oh,
it?
yeah.
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 So from
Yeah, I
minor
mean,
things all the way up to real big
right.
things. Mm-hmm.
I mean, people usually come to me when they're stuck. I mean, if you talked about the book is called Unstuck, because that's when you want to get help, right? I mean, you need
that's
an
true.
ally to show up for you. You need a mentor. So you're looking for somebody to help you. If your life's coasting along just fine, you really don't need help, right?
Yeah, true.
So that's where people will look and say, okay, I need a little bit of help with this. Please tell me what to do next. And I'm like, well, let's do it together. Let's take my hand. I'm here for you. And we're going to figure this out together. And all the answers are there, and they've been left behind for us by others. So yeah.
That's really cool. Well, do you have any final thoughts, words, anything for my listeners?
Well, my favorite thing to say here is that I know it feels like we are, but you are not alone. I mean, there are so many people out. I mean, even if it's not someone that's alive anymore, I mean, they're still here. They've left things behind that can help us. And all we really have to do is allow others to help us. And sometimes that's hard too.
Yeah.
But I'm here. There's lots and lots of other people that are here. And we have more friends than we realize when our lives seem the darkest. And I think just recognizing that there are people who care and that want to show up for us is sometimes really hard to do because you feel like you're alone and you feel like there's nobody here that cares about you. And that's the thing that happens to a lot of people when they get stuck.
Yeah.
And that would be the number one thing is you are not alone. There are those that want to help. And even if all you do is go to the library and get a couple of books about myth and see what they have to say to you, that's a great place to start.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much. I really
You're
enjoyed this
welcome.
conversation. I hope you were able to touch on all the things that you
Yeah,
wanted to, because
yeah,
I think this is
absolutely.
just so cool. I've never heard of it before now. So, and I hope it resonates with everybody listening. Like
Yeah,
I
me
said,
too.
being a book reader, I think this is fascinating and I
Yeah.
love it. So, because yeah, I always want to go on the adventures in my books. I'm like, oh,
Right?
it's so
Right.
great and so fun. I mean,
Yeah.
even though there's dark and scary parts,
Right.
you want to be the hero or the heroine,
Yeah. Yeah,
and
exactly.
so to just change your little mindset into that you
Yeah.
are and you can be.
Yeah. It takes the
Um,
smallest shift sometimes to completely change your life.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So thank you so much, Allison, for coming
You're very
on and
welcome.
chatting with us. And yeah, it has. I
Yeah,
really
yeah,
loved
you're
it.
welcome.
And thank you everyone for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you enjoyed our conversation and found value in the stories shared, please consider following us on your preferred podcast platform. Your ratings and reviews make a huge difference. They help us reach more listeners and continue bringing you engaging, insightful content. We appreciate your support and would love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Until next time, keep listening, growing, and sharing.